Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to break down the Orioles signing of Tomoyuki Sugano, what it means for the rotation now that the Orioles have added the 35-year-old right-hander on a one-year, $13 million deal who will make his MLB debut next year after a career in Japan that saw him as one of the most accomplished pitchers in Japanese baseball. And we'll talk about all of that on tonight's episode of Orioles on the Verge, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC. Head to BetOnline today and don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. So the Orioles make their first move to bolster the rotation this offseason by signing Sugano to a one-year, $13 million contract. Now, Sugano has been a big name in Japan for a long time. And if you've watched the World Baseball Classic, certainly in the last couple of editions, you have probably seen Sugano on the mound at some point. Now, you go back to when he was pitching for Team Japan in 2017. He's a little bit of a different pitcher now. Does not throw as hard as he did then. Probably does not throw his fastball as often. But what he possesses at this age is a very deep repertoire with excellent command. And the Orioles are banking on that, helping to improve their rotation next year. Sugano is certainly not the pitcher that can address the hole at the top of the Orioles rotation, but seemingly gives them good depth. And we'll break that down on tonight's episode. And I'll just start off with this thought, which is that this felt like a perfect Michael Elias move. Really no sign that it was coming until it happened. So I have to think that he felt good about that. But as we'll talk about a little bit more tonight, Ken Rosenthal at The Athletic put together an interesting piece breaking down how the Orioles managed to sign Sugano. So we'll get into that a little bit. And we'll also break down what his addition means to the rotation. So, Nick, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on this move?
It's fine. I think like for the role that he's going to be expected to fill and what he can provide on the field this year, I think it's a fine move. Like he is a 35-year-old pitcher coming in from overseas. Yes, he's one of the more decorated pitchers of all time over there in Japan. He's had a fantastic career, but he's not going to find like the fountain of youth over here and like add more velo to the fastball or pump out a ton of innings. But I do think that because like I'm not really holding out any hope that Kyle Bradish throws any meaningful innings this year or Tyler Wells. As much as we're talking about all the aces we're trading for and all the aces we wanted the Orioles to sign, they also needed to like raise the floor of this rotation and like solidify the back end of that rotation. And for that purpose, I think adding Sugano to the mix here is a solid move. Like you said, the fastball velo has diminished. The stuff may have diminished a little bit, but the guy throws a ton of strikes. The guy misses barrels, and as long as he can continue that, then I think he will be pretty successful. Like I've seen some takes like as much as he's our number 3. Like I wouldn't say that. Or like he pushes Kramer out of the rotation. I wouldn't say that either. I'd say he's in the mix. He's a solid option. I kind of assumed that they were going to go back to the KBO, and I was waiting for the Orioles to sign Kyle Hart tweet to drop. Former Red Sox prospect who had an ugly debut in 2020 and never made it back to the majors, but revamped his stuff. And apparently there are like 18 teams interested in his services. And I figured the Orioles have to be in on him. And that's going to be the move that they bring in. But I like the veteran. I think the more exciting stuff is definitely what potential impact he could have down the road in future years or off the field. But as far as like who he is as a pitcher, solid depth move that raises the floor of the rotation and brings a much needed veteran in that mix, because there's good depth, but it's all young, inexperienced rookie depth. And bringing a 35-year-old, all-star MVP Japanese pitcher into the fold, like you said, completely unexpected, but yeah, I like it.
Yeah, love being blindsided by Michael Elias in this front office when it comes to these things. always assume it's going to be someone we're not expecting, and Shigano is certainly that. And if you look at Orioles Twitter, you'd think we got worse with this signing than rather than better. But I beg to differ with those takes. Yeah, I like it. Just whether it works out or not, it's obviously risky when you're bringing in a 35-year-old who could potentially be on the decline. His velocity's down over the past few years. I think 2024 was a nice bounce back for him after a couple down years before that. But I think the Orioles announcement of his signing on Twitter has already broken the team record for likes and views and retweets and everything else. So clearly this is having an impact in a different market that the Orioles haven't been to in quite a while, since Wei-Yin Chen and Koji Uehara days. So love to see this front office dive into the Asian market, and I doubt that it has any effect whatsoever on Roki Sasaki and that sweepstakes that's going on. But hey, if he's a big Tomoyuki Sugano fan from way back, then maybe it does help a little bit. I'm not going to get my hopes up on that, but I think it's cool. And honestly, the stuff looks like it's going to play as long as he can learn to pitch up in his zone a little bit more and go to the breaking stuff and pitch sequencing a little bit different than the game in Japan says. I think I saw the stuff plus numbers. The fastball was like an 80, but everything else was 100 and up. Splitter looks fantastic. Curveball looks pretty good. So I think this Orioles pitching development and Drew French and company can get him to, get out there every 5 or 6 days and be helpful to his team. Like you said, we need depth, not just at the top of the rotation, but also in the middle/bottom. I mean, we've got a lot of decent options, but none of them, like Nick said, are this veteran that's proven to get the job done. And I still think we're going to go out and get a top of the rotation guy. That's obviously still the goal. Ken Rosenthal even said that in one of his pieces. And I want to point out something Dan Sanchez said, who's a great follow on Twitter or Blue Sky now, always with the smart takes. He was looking at the projections for Sugano. It's about 140 innings, around 100 ERA plus, maybe a little bit better. Zip's projection for Nick Pivetta is 133 innings, 100 ERA plus, 1.7 WAR, which is pretty close to Sugano, and he's projected to get 3 or 4 years, close to $20 million annual average salary, and will cost you a draft pick. So, as usual, the Orioles looking at the cost-effective, the smarter choices when it comes to these types of signings.
Yeah, in really no way does it make this team worse. What I think it does is it gives them a buffer, because I'm kind of the same mindset as Nick right now, which is that even if you're holding out hope that Tyler Wells and Kyle Braddis give you meaningful innings this year, you have to prepare for the possibility that that's not going to happen. You have to prepare for the possibility that Albert Suarez is going to regress. You have to prepare for the possibility that one of, or possibly two, or maybe all three of Brandon Young, Chase McDermott, and Cade Povitz can't break through in the majors this year. So there's all these variables that I think you have to account for. And as we saw last year, accounting for the unforeseen matters a lot, because the Orioles really couldn't do that last year. Granted, they had a lot of things thrown in their face as the season went on, but really what we saw at the end was their depth kind of eroded, especially on the position player side. So I really do think that Sugano helps to buffer in that respect. Upside wise, yeah, I'm thinking right now he's a 4 or 5 starter. If you get 140 decent innings out of him, I think you call that a win. And as for what they can work with, I just like the fact that the guy does not walk anybody. It's one thing to have the fastball down from the mid 90s, where it was at the prime of his career, to kind of now the 92, 93 range is what most estimates I saw. But like Bob said, if you can get him to work that fastball up in the zone more, and he continues to throw his other pitches for strikes, I don't see how he can be any worse than a league average pitcher.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of some other guys in the past. Like, it's not like an Alex Wells, where he was fantastic command but no stuff. Like, Sagano has stuff. you mentioned the fastball stuff plus might have been like 80, and that's not great. But I know Lance Brzezowski also put out a great thread that just nice, beautiful summation, pitch by pitch breakdown. He posted on Twitter and Blue Sky there. Check that out. Like you said, quoting Lance here, the fastball should still have some hop. You're going to go to the MLB ball, so he's going to lose a little bit. It was like 18, 19 inches of IVB. That he projects probably down like 16 or so, but the stuff may take a dip, but he throws the fastball in the zone at 70% clip. And so, like, yeah, and I know it was the same. I think his name's Brandon too at Sports Info Solutions. He did a full breakdown. He watched, every Roki Sasaki start and has a great breakdown over there. He did the same thing for Sugano and talked about that. Like, yeah, throw the fastball up in the zone probably a little bit more because he leaves it over the plate, it's going to get hit hard. And in Japan, they're throwing, it's a dead baseball. So, the home run numbers, the power numbers against him look fantastic. When he comes over to the States, he's leaving balls over the middle of the plate, a 91, 92 mile per hour fastball here. There's going to be a home run issue. But if he can locate his pitches like that, the cutter, curveball, splitter, as Lance calls it, the cutter is the lefty neutralizer. The curveball, splitter are huge swing and miss offerings. I think, yeah, you can tinker with the mix, tinker with the usage, which apparently Drew French and Ryan Klimek and Elias and Mike Snyder were all on the call with Sasaki, and they grilled him on that and had a good back and forth conversation about that. And it seems like, yeah, they've got plans, and they presented that plans how they're going to tinker with the usage to help his stuff play up more in Major League Baseball. And clearly Sugano was into it and picked the Orioles, which again leads into like what I think the bigger thing with this signing is the impact he's going to have on this organization for hopefully years to come.
Yeah, I think the Orioles are going to have more eyeballs from Japan than they ever have before, most likely, with this Hall of Famer in the KBO, or not KBO, I'm sorry, MPD. Is that what it is? MBD?
MVP.
Yeah, MVP. Yeah, so I wonder if... What the heck was I going to say? Ah, shit. What was the last point before the point about Elias talking to him back and forth?
The tinkering with the usage and his mix.
Yes. Okay, so it's honestly not that much different than when Zach Eflin was brought in. They did make some small changes with his pitch mix, and I wonder because, I mean, he's obviously not the same pitcher. He's got a larger repertoire. He's got 6 pitches, and the stuff is a little bit different. But I wonder if, just like with Eflin, who comes in and throws strikes, gets soft contact, doesn't strike out a bunch of guys, he comes over to the Orioles. They make some small pitch sequencing changes. I think they had him go to the sinker a little bit more. I can't remember exactly. But if they can honestly treat him similar to that, maybe the strikeouts can go up. Maybe they can get more out of him. And I think signing Sugano might give Albert Suarez another role on this team again, where it was kind of looking like if the Orioles bring in 2 starters, what is Albert Suarez's role going to be? Because he pitched worse in the bullpen than he did out of the rotation. He's out of options. He was so good for us this past season. He should have a role. Is he going to be trade bait? But honestly, if you just make Sugano like your Saturday or Sunday starter for most of the season, and then the weeks when there's a day off or two, you keep your 5-man rotation. The weeks when you need a 6th starter, if you have Albert Suarez available in the bullpen, he can fill that role. So it's just something that I thought could maybe be a way to, whether it's Suarez or even Trevor Rogers or whoever, maybe just take extra advantage of the arms that you have on your pitching staff.
I found it interesting in a piece in The Athletic this week. Ken Rosenthal kind of pulled back the curtain on how the Orioles managed to sign Sugano. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, this was really not on anybody's radar as a move the Orioles were going to make. So the announcement comes out, and then you learn from Rosenthal's piece, which I would highly recommend that you go read if you haven't read it already, about how the Orioles were really able to sell him on the development aspect of it, which is an unusual thing you don't really think about with a 35-year-old pitcher, but they sold him on ways they could help him be successful and even improve in the major leagues. And I thought that was really crucial because that's kind of what you have to sell as an organization right now. So for them to be able to go out and do that, and really in an all hands on deck effort too, to me was impressive.
Yeah. And I think part of it too, a reason why I like this signing, and to Bob's point there about when you're going to throw him and everything, there is that issue of in Japan, in Korea, these guys throw once a week, right? So if he makes rotation, is he going to be able to go every 5 days, or are the Orioles going to go to a 6-man rotation, or how are they going to play all this out? I feel like with Sugano, he's not like Roki Sasaki, who now is going to have to adjust, and he's the flamethrower throwing upper 90s with all that extra effort on his arm. This is a command artist, right? So yeah, he's 35. Yeah, there's injury history. He might be breaking down just a little bit, but like I feel like if his profile, his game, his style is a really good fit for when he tries to translate it here over into the States. And then to Zach's point, talking about how they sold it, that's why I love this signing so much. Him as the pitcher, again, it's fine. I hope he does well. I hope he translates the stuff profiles as a solid 4 or 5 starter in the major leagues. He's just got to go out and execute now. But the bigger thing with this is that the Orioles said, hey, here's a Japanese legend, right? A 35-year-old guy who I think he had an opportunity to come to the States before and nobody wanted him. Or I don't know if there was something else with that, but
I think it was the 2020 season, so obviously very weird stuff involved there. And I think he was only going to come over if he got a certain amount of money on an offer. But yeah, there's a little bit more to it. But yeah, basically he was considering it before.
Well, he's 35 and he's got this huge reputation over there. He doesn't want to come over here and like flatline, right? Or pitch for the Angels, right? And just win 45 games next year, or the White Sox. Like the Orioles sold him on, you come over here, win a World Series. Here's how we're going to do it. And also, like, here's how we're going to make you better. Here's how we're going to extend your career. Not saying that there's a huge ceiling there, but here's how we can tinker with your stuff and get maybe just a little bit more out of you, hopefully. And when you're selling the pitching development, as we've been talking about for so long, if you can sell it to this 35-year-old all-star MVP Japanese pitcher to come all the way to Baltimore and pitch, where like there are no other Japanese players on this roster. I don't even know if there's a single Asian player in this organization. Like, I think that's huge. He could have went to another team. If he wants to go win a World Series in the States, there are plenty of other teams. I'm sure he could have went to, I don't know how many teams offered him, but I'm sure other teams had much easier pitches. He chose the Orioles. The Orioles sold what they're preaching down the farm as far as pitching is concerned and at the major league level, and it worked.
Yeah, and honestly, this is a long shot. I don't think this is likely, but I'm not ruling out the possibility that there's still 2 more starting pitcher additions on the way, and that leaves you room to potentially, Mike Elias was quoted earlier this offseason, I think at the winter meetings, that they're looking for more major leaguer type of trades this season and not as much emptying the farm for a pitcher or a player that they trade for. So maybe Dean Kramer becomes a viable trade candidate, and then Sugano could take his place, and then you still get 2 more pitchers. I think that's asking a lot, but wouldn't rule it out. Maybe a Kramer-Mountcastle combination for who knows who, another pitcher or what have you. But yeah, I just like, clearly this organization loves having options and ways that they can recover from injuries and just have options available that they can use. Albert Suarez started last year in the minor leagues. He becomes a crucial piece. They're thinking further ahead than the randos on talk that host radio shows and call into radio shows and the guys on Twitter.
Yeah, but it's like,
go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I hope this is, even if his impact on the field isn't huge, he's a 1 WAR pitcher, right? It gives us 115, 120 innings of okay baseball. It's still, it's not a huge investment here in Sugano, but I do hope that this is their foot in the door. And I think in that Rosenthal piece, I think he mentions that it's ownership, I think is the quote, that ownership's goal is to create a stronghold in Asia, which is a positive sign to see. I don't think he said it was Elias, although I'm sure Elias and Kobe Perez and these guys have been trying that. But to hear that this is also a goal of ownership is pretty cool. But I hope this is the foot in the door to say, all right, maybe they're not going to get Sasaki. They're probably not going to get Sasaki, although, as we just seen, anything can happen. But this is the foot in the door, and you've got a Japanese legend who will go back home and say, hey, this organization treated me well. It's a good organization. This is a good clubhouse. The development is good. And the Orioles present a strong case to younger, higher quality players in the future. And yeah, it's a win, a huge win for, Mike Snyder and Kobe Perez and the entire organization to get this first one in the books. And I hope it leads to some bigger things in the future.
Before we wrap up, I think the one thing that we can all agree on sitting here is the Orioles aren't finished with the rotation just yet. There's going to be another move this offseason. And it's likely going to be to acquire a pitcher that's going to pitch at the top of the rotation. Now, even before you bring in that extra arm, you've got a lot of depth. It's a question about quality, but you've got a lot of depth. Let's say the Orioles do bring in another pitcher. What do you think that 5-man or possibly 6-man rotation looks like when you factor in another acquisition plus Sugano, plus Zach Eflin, plus Grayson Rodriguez, plus Dean Kramer, Albert Suarez, Cade Povich, Trevor Rogers, who we've kind of forgotten about but is still in the organization. You could even throw Chase McDermott and Brandon Young in there if you wanted to. How do the Orioles sort all of this out? Do you think that it's a set 5 that Sugano and Kramer are at the back of the rotation, or is there a little bit of competition in there?
I definitely think there will be competition in spring. I think we've seen it before that the Orioles are not afraid to, if someone's shown vast improvements in AAA and proves that they're ready and another person looks like they took a step back, I don't think they're scared to make that switch. But I don't think we know who the opening day starter is yet. Well, we definitely don't know, but I think the guy that's going to start on opening day is not on the team just yet. I think that person will be acquired, whether it's retaining Corbin Burns, trading for a Zach Gallen like we talked about last week. That'll be number one. Then you got Eflin and Rodriguez, 2-3 somewhere. I think Kramer and Povich are right there at the back. And then, like I said, maybe it's Sugano every Sunday afternoon with Albert Suarez starting in the bullpen but can fill in when needed. Trevor Rogers, I think, will start in AAA unless he shows, comes into spring training just looking amazing. And then, of course, you have McDermott, Young, even guys like Pham, Weston, Bright in AAA ready for their chance when it arrives, if and when it arrives. Hopefully we don't go into spring training in a couple months and that first press conference with Michael Elias like last year, hopefully it's not too bad, the injury front news that we hear. Yeah, I think that's basically what it's going to look like.
I forgot all about that coming up where, they're hiding all these injuries. No, every organization has that first press conference where they just unload all the bad news. Yeah, I don't know. I like you bring in the top line guy, right? Or I think it needs to be a top of the line guy, but what if it is like a Sean Manaea or someone in that second tier free agency that we talked about before? Either way, you're going to bring in another guy. That guy plus Eflin, plus Rodriguez, plus Kramer, plus Sugano. I like that 5. Suarez in the bullpen gives you a little bit of length down there, and then to have Povich and Trevor Rogers, these are younger guys who have options, so you can send them down to AAA. McDermott can be in the mix as well. We know they're clearly, as much as I would love for them to just put McDermott in the bullpen, they're not going to do that right now. They're going to keep working him as a starter. This is what I was saying at the beginning of the offseason. I would love for Norfolk's rotation to be Cade Povich, Chase McDermott, Brandon Young, Trevor Rogers, Armbruster, or another veteran that they bring in, off the waiver wire, some veteran they bring last minute when spring training starts to add a Spencer Watkins type arm to add some depth down to AAA.
Julio Teheran.
Hopefully a little bit better than that. But but I would love for that to be Norfolk's rotation to start the year and for the Orioles to roll with the guys without options at the top. And then, if you got to move Sugano, if you got to do a 6-man and bring Rogers or Povich, you ride the hot hand. If it's Rogers starts out the year hot, you come up, you give him a shot, you roll the dice. And if he starts to flounder after 5 or 6 starts, you can send him back down. Like, this is why you have the options. And the Orioles, like you said, have no issues with moving these guys in and out. They're young arms too. Rogers, Povich, all these guys are young arms. I think they'll giving them more time down in AAA next year isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if we can bring in a Corbin Burns or trade for another ace and set this. You need what, 10, 12, 15 starters to get through the year. Yeah, they're far from done regardless.
That does it for this episode of Orioles on the Verge. We will be back in a few days with a mailbag. A lot of great listener questions came in the days leading up to this show, so we're looking forward to getting into those. And that will give us at least one more episode before 2024 comes to a close. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, YouTube, and Blue Sky. We're also over at Substack, Orioles on the Verge. .substack.com. And as a hint, one of our mailbag questions in the episode later this week is going to talk about something that just appeared on Substack. So you should look forward to that. And you can find us over at Patreon. Our community there you can join for as little as $3 a month. And at the $5 and $10 levels, have access to exclusive coverage. Should note two things. One, our countdown of the top 50 prospects for 2025 will begin sometime in early January. And the other is that you can still give Patreon memberships as gifts. This offer is available to current Patreon members to give a Patreon gift subscription to an Orioles fan in their life. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network. Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to take questions from our listeners as part of our latest Orioles mailbag. But first, Orioles on the Verge is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC. Head to BetOnline today and don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now, for what might or might not be our last show of 2024, we'll figure that out in a few days here, depending on our schedules. We've got our mailbag open. We got a lot of great questions from listeners covering a wide range of topics from the current off season to next year's minor league season and a very, very early look at the 2025 draft. And I will dive right in with a question from the Bird is the Word. As it stands, how would you grade the Orioles off season? What move would you like to see them make before spring training? I will start with Bob.
First of all, this is a very incomplete grade because there are still 2 months left in the offseason. We said on our last episode, obviously the Orioles aren't done. They're going to at least acquire one more starting pitcher. We don't know top of the rotation, middle of the rotation, what have you, but I would give it a solid B so far, considering that I don't know many other teams that have signed 3 free agents. And look, we've replaced Anthony Santander, who still hasn't signed at the time of this recording, with Tyler O'Neill, the biggest contract in the Mike Elias tenure, 3-year deal, just under $50 million. Opt out after year 1, but we'll see what happens there. You also improved your backup catcher situation from James McCann to Gary Sanchez, and you got one of the 2 starting pitchers that you want to acquire going into the season in Tomoyuki Sugano, and you tapped into that Asian market like we just talked about. So it's a solid B. If you can get a ace / top of the rotation arm in here and maybe make some, moves around the fringes, the edges of the roster, then it could go up to B plus A territory. But right now I'll say B.
How about you go next, Zach? Because I could not answer this question and the next question. I couldn't untangle them. So I had to combine those two.
That's a good point. I will go with a B minus in the sense that I think this offseason has gone according to plan, except for the fact you still have that big hole at the top of the rotation. And look, I don't know there are a lot of pitchers that can replace Corbin Burns, but I think that what we know is that the depth that the Orioles have right now is fine, but probably not enough to get them to where we know they can be, which is pushing for a World Series or at least pushing for a deep playoff run. So it is a little bit incomplete right now. And I think they do need to fill that hole. But otherwise, they've kind of done what you would hope that they would do, which is that they went out and they added a right-handed bat and one that could be a solid replacement for Santander if he leaves as expected. I think that Gary Sanchez is going to prove to be an upgrade, however marginal, over James McCann. But guess what? It's a backup catcher. It doesn't matter that much. And the one thing that I feel like people are forgetting is you have Felix Bautista coming back. And even if he's not going to be the closer on day one, that is going to make a huge difference in that bullpen. So I think the Orioles need to add another reliever or two, but it does not have to be a blockbuster move to really make the bullpen better, in my opinion. So I would say right now a B minus in the sense you still have one big hole there to fill, but otherwise I think the offseason has gone about as reasonably well as you could have hoped.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and segue to the next question, and I'll lead it off with Nick to answer it. Sterling would like to know, the Orioles need to blank for the offseason not to be a failure. I know this is not the match game. I really want an honest answer here, Nick.
Yes, I don't know. I just feel like I had to like combine those two questions to think of my answer, because for my offseason grade, and I thought I was the easy grader. Like, going back to my teaching days, I was the easy grader because whole different podcast to discuss my grading philosophy in school. But I gave them a C, and because I felt like a lot of people are blurting out F. It's an F. This is a failure. I'm sure there'll be comments. This is an F. This is a failure. But I felt like a C because they've done the minimum, right? It's C with C plus, B minus potential, but like, they've done the minimum, right? They, like Bob said, you took a higher risk with the higher upside play with Tyler O'Neill to replace Santander. I like that. That gets a little extra credit boost there for me. You could have gone Randall Grichuk, as the Orioles were tied to. You could have gone a safer route. A lot of question marks with Tyler O'Neill, but I feel like the ceiling, as we've talked about, is just a touch higher than Santander. You replaced James McCann with Gary Sanchez, who both these guys, they walk more than their predecessors. So this is one thing we want to see the Orioles do: get on base more, add more offense. I think they've done that. And then now they've brought in at least competition for the back end of the rotation. So it's been solid so far. But I still think what would send that over the top for me, and that's also why I don't think this offseason has been a failure. I wouldn't call it a failure. And I know Sterling said that it's harsh language. You get it. But it's like, even if they do nothing else for the rest of the offseason, I don't think I can call this offseason a failure, because they've at least replaced what they've lost with the bats. I think the offense has potential to be a little bit better. It would just be highly unsatisfactory if they do nothing else this offseason. So for me to go from, hey, this is a highly unsatisfactory offseason, a highly disappointing offseason, to a fun offseason, I want the ace. I know some people may say we don't need the ace. I think we do. I want the comfort of whether it's Corbin Burns, and yeah, I agree, the longer he stays on the market, the more hopeful I do get, which I hate. But I want that comfort of an ace that's going to take the ball game one of a playoff series. That guy that every 5 days, you're in the best position to win a baseball game. That's what I need to see this offseason. And we still have like 2 months of the offseason to go, so still plenty of time.
Yeah, sorry, Zach. I was just going to cut in because I didn't answer the second part of the first question either, because it was kind of tied in here. But yeah, for this, I don't think the offseason could be a failure, but I would be disappointed if this was it, obviously, but it's not going to be. I'd say we need one top of the rotation arm. Yeah, whether it's bringing Corbin Burns back, trading for Zach Gallen, Framber Valdez, someone we haven't thought of, which is probably most likely, Yeah, I think that's it. We need to bring in that guy that's going to start opening day. It's going to start game one of the playoffs that we're definitely going to make. That's it.
Yeah, I think you guys both captured the nuance that I was trying to get with this second question, which is that I already would say that this offseason has not been a failure, but I can't say I'm satisfied with it either. So there's a big difference between those two things. And the Orioles need to do more. There's no question in my mind about that. And the rotation is the hole right now, or the top of the rotation is the hole that they have to fill. But I think this offseason has not been a failure. It's a little bit unsatisfactory right now, but it's not a failure.
Yeah. What do is what the Yankees are doing or the Red Sox doing? Does that play any role into y'all's thought process? Because I don't care what the Yankees are doing personally.
Could not care less. And I honestly don't think they're doing all that much. I mean, they didn't bring Juan Soto back. He is gone. And I love the takes I'm seeing.
Blockbuster trades.
Yeah, or the Orioles are
Salary
sitting
dump.
here. The Orioles are sitting here siding over the hill pitchers to be their fifth starter while the Yankees are getting better. The Yankees lost Juan Soto, the best hitter outside, probably a better hitter than Shohei Ohtani. He just isn't a great fielder and can't pitch. But, I mean, they lose one of the great talents in the game. And, yeah, they got Max Fried, who's a great pitcher. Took over a week to announce the signing. I wonder how that elbow's looking on those medicals. But I do like Max Fried. It's a good signing. But trading for Cody Bellinger, okay. He had a 750 OPS last season. He doesn't hit the ball hard anymore. I don't think that's scary at all. If you look at their lineup, it's still Judge and pray for a miracle. I don't know. Their pitching's good. Their offense sucks outside of Judge. They'll probably still make some moves. Hopefully they sign Paul Goldschmidt, trade for Nolan Arenado so they can have some more disappointing veterans that they think are going to get them over the hump. But yeah, I do not care what the Yankees are doing. I care about the Orioles and what they do because that's all we can control. And I think we are the favorites to win the East as it stands today, even with everyone complaining about how Michael Elias is asleep at the wheel.
Boston does make me a little bit nervous because that lineup is deep. And it doesn't have an Aaron Judge quality player in it, but I think that it's actually a deeper lineup than what the Yankees have. And you add Garrett Crochet into that mix. And look, I'm not 100% sold on Garrett Crochet just yet. We're looking at one season track record of him pitching at an ace-like level. And if he doesn't get deep into the season and pitch well in the playoffs for the Red Sox, that's not going to do them a ton of good. So and the Yankees, yeah, I don't think you can replace Juan Soto very easily. And while I think they're better than they were in 2023 when their lineup depended entirely on what Aaron Judge did that particular night and whether or not he was healthy, I think they've taken a little bit of a step backwards, honestly. And you've got the Rays, which that whole situation is unfortunate because I actually thought that they had a chance to bounce back this year. And then Toronto, they're linked to every single free agent there is. I'm sure they're going to make a move at some point, but how many off seasons have we been through with the Blue Jays of they sign this guy and then they go out and they win 85 games? So I'm not that nervous yet. Boston makes me nervous, but Boston's lineup already made me nervous. They just feel like a more complete team now.
Yeah, they're the kings of winning the paper offseason. But yeah, Boston, the Yankees aren't making blockbuster moves. Boston, though, I don't even want to call them a sleeping giant. They scare the crap out of me next season. But we'll see what they do. Let's move on to the next question and talk about the Orioles again. This is from Connor Newcomb, host of Locked On Orioles. Season on the line. He always comes in with the good thought-provoking questions. Season on the line. Sugano, Suarez, Povich are all available to start the game. Who takes the mound, Zach?
I really hope it doesn't come down to this, but in the hypothetical where it does come down to one, I'm gonna go with Sugano because it just feels like right now that it's the safest option. I love Albert Suarez's mound presence, and I don't think that he's ever gonna wither in a big moment if that opportunity comes around for him. But that's counting on him pitching the way that he did last year again, that you would want to give him the ball. And Povich, I think Povich might have the highest upside of these three arms, but he hasn't shown it just yet. Whereas Sagano has been on a big stage in Japan before. And, WBC is what it is. But I think that that is something that gives players more recognition. He has pitched well there. Older guy, that's who I would go with right now.
It is a good question. I also hope it doesn't come down to that. Suarez is the last bottom on my list. Not an insult to Suarez, great last year, like we said, but I don't know. I think Sugano and Povich are better, or will be better in Povich's case, and that's why I'm going with Povich, is because he's going to have a whole nother season of development. We've seen how the Orioles' young starters come up, struggle, get sent back down, rebound. Povich ended the year super strong. I would expect another full season under the tutelage of Drew French and being in the same clubhouse as these veterans like Sugano, Eflin, even Grayson Rodriguez, I feel like, and whoever comes in as the ace. Like, I just think he's going to get better and better. Again, he's not a pure stuff guy. He's a pitch mix guy, but we don't have many lefties. And I think he's just going to take this step up and at least be the fourth starter on this team by the end of the year. So I'll go with Cade Povich.
Yeah, I kind of assume Suarez, or at least you kind of hope that he's somewhere in the middle between, first half Albert Suarez and second half Albert Suarez. And I think projections have him at around that mark going into next year, which is fine. As we just talked about, when we talked about the Sugano signing, Suarez probably fills a more bullpen role, spot starter type deal. But if he's at least somewhere there in the middle of what he performed last year, I do think Povich can take a step forward. I'm anxious to see how big of a step forward he takes in year two. Again, with Povich, I think a lot of people's expectations of Povich were, he's the next number 2 guy in this rotation. He's a potential, he's one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. I think Povich performed pretty much in line with how I expected him to perform last year. And I don't think there's a massive ceiling, but there is plenty of room for him to develop into a very solid mid to back end rotation starter. If Sugano comes over and settles in and is just that pitcher that, we talked about what Lance Brzezowski kind of projects him to be when he moves over to the States using the MLB ball. If he can become that type of pitcher, he doesn't develop the home run issue. I went with Sugano here just because I like the command guy. Let the defense work behind you early in the game. Yes, he's only throwing 91, 92, but then if he can get through a lineup 2 times, you bring in Chase McDermott, who's pumping 99 miles per hour with a totally different look. I don't know how much of that plays. This is just an example of why my managerial career is like never going to extend beyond out of the park baseball. But I like that. Give me the command artists to start with. Let them kind of lull the hitters maybe to sleep a little bit. Oh, he's not throwing gas. We got this. Then they get frustrated because they can't square him up. And then you get McDermott or Ciano Perez. You get someone else with a completely different look with way more velo. Get you to King Felix in the back end of the game. Whatever we're on the line. If it's a World Series on the line, regular season on the line, Connor didn't specify. Either way, Orioles take it.
Well, in the different looks, it's been the Rays formula for a long time. So anything you can do to emulate that is a good thing. I'll jump in now. This question from Seth: if the Orioles don't make any more signings or trades, which prospects do you think they're showing the most confidence in to take a step forward and become big league regulars? And I'll start with Bob on this one.
It's easy to say Jackson Holliday going to be handed second base. Kobe Mayo, if they trade, or if they don't trade, maybe it doesn't say that much about Kobe Mayo, at least to start the season. But for me, if they don't make any more moves from today, that means that they think Cade Povich, Chase McDermott, Brandon Young are like ready to rock. And I don't think that's going to be the case. But yeah, I think those are the pitchers that are going to be the depth in case of injury for the most part until at least Wells and Bradish get back. And like we've said, can't count on them. There could be setbacks in rehab, and the stuff might not be all the way back when they get back. So, yeah, I think that would be putting a huge amount of pressure and faith in those rookie pitchers. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Well, Mets just signed Griffin Canning, so there goes that dream. Yeah, it's
Sorry, Vivek.
It's the pitching. Yeah, if you don't make any other signings, you're saying Cade Povich is taking that massive leap forward. You're saying Chase McDermott is a starter moving forward. You're saying Brandon Young can step up and make 15 or so starts for you this season. He's not a prospect, but you're also saying you trust Trevor Rogers a lot. And I hope Trevor Rogers bounces back and they get something out of him. I really do. But I agree. You can't go into next season riding the backs mostly of second-year guys, rookies, 35-year-old coming over from Japan, and even, Bradish, Wells, guys coming off TJ Brace combo, whatever they had. Again, I don't see them pitching in 2025. So, yeah, that's a lot of trust in arms that I like. We all like. They have potential, but I don't like putting all of that trust in those guys for a full season when you're expecting to win a World Series.
You guys are absolutely right. I'll just throw one more into the mix, and that's Heston Kjerstad. Now, technically, Kjerstad really is not a prospect anymore, but he's barely over the threshold for one, and Baseball America still has him on their list. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, he's a prospect, or he's at least a young, unproven player. If the Orioles don't acquire another first base corner outfield bat option, and Tyler O'Neill is their move for the offseason, and they're going to run it back with Mountcastle and O'Hearn at first base, that leaves an opportunity for Heston Kjerstad to get more playing time than I think he had in the past. Now, health has to be a factor in that. And unfortunately, last year, the concussion came along at a point where it looked like he was starting to get at least semi-regular time. But if they go into spring training right now with this group of position players that they have, Kjerstad is on the opening day roster. And as we saw last year with Colton Cowser, you hit when you get the opportunities, you're eventually going to play every day. And while it might not be that simple for Kjerstad, as long as O'Neill, Mountcastle, and O'Hearn are all healthy and producing, he's going to get a shot. And I think that if the Orioles don't make another move to acquire someone that's at least another power bat that can fill in those positions, and they don't package Kjerstad to get a starter, I think that means that they're ready to test him in the major leagues for an extended run and see what he can do.
Sounds good. EJ would like to know, what are your expectations for the 4 high school draft picks, Andrew Tess, DJ Layton, Nate George, and Braylon Whitaker for next year? How would they compare against some of the higher profile DSL, FCL players? Nick?
Fun question. I like Nate George a lot. He was one of my favorite draft picks last year, as we've talked about. I think my expectation for George is we see him in the FCL, and he's got this power speed combo, elite track star in high school, doesn't even practice, shows up, wins state titles in track to show off his athleticism. But he's like a cold weather guy, I think, as well, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he's from Minnesota. So I just want to see him in the FCL. I want to see him take control of everyday regular at bats. I don't want to see him moving around or anything like that. I just want to see can he be aggressive at the plate, and he's not running a 40% strikeout rate down there in the FCL this year. I don't have huge expectations of George this year. I just want to see him settle in and see what he's got out there on the field as much as we can. FCL, kind of hard to see these guys, but George, I think, does have the highest ceiling. DJ Layton, I just want to see him play shortstop every day. Whenever he's in there, I want to see if he can be the primary shortstop. Do they move him around? Do they have him move out to center field some when he was down there in the FCL? Some outlets have him as a top 30 prospect. Again, same thing. Statistically, I'm not too picky what the numbers look like. I just want to see, like, can he be a bona fide like shortstop moving forward? Tess and Whitaker, I don't know if you guys have anything else about Whitaker. I have no expectations for Whitaker because I don't know a single thing about him other than he's from North Carolina and was committed to Wingate. He's in the system. Tess is really interesting, power hitting catcher. I just want to hear what about Tess. I just want to hear, do pitchers love throwing to him? That's about it for a high school kid. Could he be the next Creed Willems in this system? Potentially, but I just want to hear, like, oh yeah, pitchers down there in the FCL, they love throwing Andrew Tess. The way he calls games, his defense behind the plate is awesome. That's pretty much my expectations. Not very high for these guys. I did want to throw out something though with these. He asked compare them to the elite crop in the FCL DSL last year. I don't know if they like hold a candle to the top DSL talent coming up. To be honest, I think the top DSL guys last year who will be in the FCL this year and Delmarva this year, I think we're severely underrating a lot of guys in the system in that class. Steven Martinez, I think this time next year, we're talking about Steven Martinez, a top 10, closer to top 5 prospect in the system. Early bold take. Emilio Sanchez, Lorenzo, Jordan Sanchez, Elvin Garcia. These guys, I think, are a clear tier above previous international signing classes. And I'm preparing my top 50 list. And so I'm digging into the DSL guys a little bit more. I think on our first run through last year, I didn't even have Steven Martinez or Sanchez in my top 50. I forgot about them. I was like, screw it, just leave them off. We'll update it next month. But Steven Martinez in the DSL this year hit 4 home runs, had an 883 OPS and a 137 WRC plus as a 16-year-old in the DSL. He outperformed Samuel Basayo, who was 16 years old in the DSL. He had a 109 WRC plus and a 748 OPS. Granted, different positions, I know all that, but Steven Martinez, he strikes out a lot, but he put up some unbelievable numbers. I think if you like Thomas Sosa in the system, Steven Martinez is like potentially Thomas Sosa on steroids. So,
yeah, when
allegedly.
Yeah, good point.
When it comes to this group, I mean, my expectations are kind of like Nick's. Just get regular playing time, just adjust to the grind of professional baseball. I feel like of this group, though, Leighton might be the one that I'm watching the most closely because the Orioles have clearly targeted players like Leighton, younger, up the middle athletes who've got good bat to ball skills, solid defense. I want to see if Leighton can be one of those guys that you look at the end of the year and, probably not going to hit for much power at all. And maybe even the batting average isn't ideal, but you look at the end of the year and he's got really good walks, strikeout numbers, a decent WRC plus. And you look at that and you think, okay, there's a foundation here, kind of like Leandro Arias when he made his pro debut. That was a guy that stood out in that way. Aaron Estrada, who we're going to talk about in a little bit here. Granted, that was different with Estrada. He debuted down in the DSL, but that was kind of what put Aaron Estrada on our radar in the first place. So Leighton is probably the guy where I'm going to really be poring over the data to figure out, okay, is this another of that type? The good bat-to-ball skills with advanced strike zone judgment for his age, and how much more could the Orioles get out of Leighton? I agree with Nick that Nate George might have the highest upside of this whole group with his athleticism. So that's another one I'm going to be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that the Orioles drafted and signed 4 high school players, which I love from last year's draft, only because, we didn't really see them at all at the end of last season. But I'm very curious to follow them. Do any get playing time in Delmarva this year? Or I think the FCL, it's going to start earlier next year. So obviously, I think they will start in the FCL, but do any of them get the promotion up to Delmarva once the season is over? DJ Layton, also my favorite of the bunch, only because I played a bunch of the Professor Layton games on Nintendo. Was it DS or Game Boy Advance? I was playing those games, so I want to be able to talk about Professor Layton down in the Orioles minor league system, but Nate George is a standout as well. I also know nothing about Braylon Whitaker and not too much about Andrew Tess, but still, look, I love when they take the young guys that they can get their hands on developmentally themselves and just start from the ground up with the way they develop and build up these players. You got to love it. Just speaking of the international guys, I think it's the way they've developed has been fantastic so far to date. And I don't know how they would compare it to some of these guys, but I agree with Nick that this last year or two of international guys, which we're going to talk about in a second even more, it has been really impressive, and hopefully they continue to break out the way they've performed already so far.
Yeah. And a lot of them, like Emilio Sanchez and some other guys, have already been, apparently other teams have already been calling the Orioles about these guys in trade packages. So speaks to the talent. EJ's second question here. Speaking of the international signees and prospects, which of these international signees is poised for the biggest breakout in 2025? Big list here, but Aaron Estrada, Leandro Arias, Edwin Amparo, Felix Amparo, not related, I don't think, Thomas Sosa, Ellis Cuevas, and Fernando Peguero. A fun shot there at Peguero. Which of these guys has the biggest breakout in 2025, Zach?
It's a really good list. And when I saw this, I was reminded of when we had to vote for breakout prospect of the year. When it's like, okay, is it everyone else's like national outlets definition of a breakout, or is it our definition of a breakout? Because we've been on Aaron Estrada for a while, but there's no question that 2024 was a big breakthrough for him. And of this group, I think that Thomas Sosa has the highest ceiling. And it's one of those things where if he comes out next year and he significantly reduces the strikeouts and takes a step forward on the things that he already does well, like hit for power, play good defense, he's going to be, in my mind, a bona fide top 20 prospect nationally as far as the Orioles rankings go, maybe even a little bit higher. But I feel like the guy with possibly the most helium is Ellis Cuevas. Only 20 years old. He got to Delmarva at the end of this year. He's going to start there next year. And what we've heard is that he's probably going to get reps in center field. I had a chance to see Cuevas at late in the year in Delmarva this past season. He can fly. He runs really well. And you pair that with good walk to strikeout numbers that he showed at both levels. The walk rate went up at Delmarva after the stint in the FCL. And yeah, strikeouts went up too. But the bottom line is that as a 19-year-old, he more than held his own over a 20-game stint at Delmarva to end the year. A point in the season where it's just go up there, get your feet wet. His numbers at the plate were pretty good. And while there's not a lot of physical projection left with Cuevas, I do think that there's, enough power there to dream on. And maybe he can hit the ball hard consistently to have maybe a super utility profile down the line. And he could really add to that value by going out and playing a good center field this year. So I know for my own list, Cuevas, I think, is safely inside the top 50 right now. But I feel like he's a guy that is going to get a lot of buzz next year if he can continue to check off some of the boxes that he already has.
Yeah, it's a great list of names here. All these guys, I think, are breakout potential. I'm going off the board for my pick, and that's Joshua Lorenzo, a healthy Joshua Lorenzo, I think is going to be a big-time breakout in 2025. But of the names you listed, EJ, I will rank them in terms of breakout potential. Number one, Leandro Arias. I think he showed really well this past season. He, couldn't stay on the field consistently. Minor injuries kept nagging him all year round, but he did eventually get to Aberdeen, and I feel like more than held his own with the Ironbirds, which is a tough thing to do for someone his age and at that level that late in the year. So Leandro Arias, I think, is going to be potentially a top 10 prospect this time next year. Then I'll say Ellis Cuevas. I agree. I think the team is very, very high on him, and for good reason. I think he was a guy that signed for like no money and then had a great year in the DSL a couple years ago, and then again, this year, he really continued that as he stepped up to the FCL and into Delmarva. Then I'll say Aaron Estrada. He kind of already broke out, but, I think there's obviously plenty of room to go for him as far as development and and just building upon the 2024 season that he had. If he can hold his own in Aberdeen all year next year, I think we should be thrilled. After that, I will go Thomas Sosa. I do agree his ceiling is through the roof. I just think it's going to take him a little bit longer to get there. If he takes a big jump next year, I still think he'll be underrated by the fan base because he's going to strike out a lot, but he is getting better at taking walks and pitch selection, swing decisions. That's the word. That's the phrase. Massive power, massive power. I think he's 2 years away, but if it can come together even sooner, that's great. Then I'll say Edwin Amparo. I think he's pretty underrated. Gets on base a lot at second base. Then Felix Amparo, he had a great season, and Fernando Peguero at the bottom.
Yeah, I do agree that Edwin Amparo is kind of the sleeper here. Just he had a 139 WRC plus and a 15% walk rate in 27 games with Delmarva to close out the season. I just think he gets overshadowed by some of the bigger names that we've got here. Thomas Sosa, if everything clicks, man, that power speed combination, we know it. He apparently thinks he's Ken Griffey Jr. If he can be 1/100th Ken Griffey Jr., you got a good ball player in your hands there. Alex Cuevas is a dark horse as well. He is going to spend some time. I hope, at least is what we've been told. He's going to spend time as probably Delmarva's primary center fielder to start the year. So I think pay close attention to him. But I'm going with Aaron Estrada because of the power. And I know we've talked about this before. Estrada, we kind of assumed was like a Freddie Bencosme type player, a pure hitter, smaller guy. I think Bencosme is probably a little bit taller, just skinnier. Estrada is smaller height-wise, but didn't think, all right, he's not going to have much power. He's just going to hit. He's going to be a hitter if he can play good defense at second base, maybe move him around a little bit. He can be a future utility player, rise quickly through the system like Bencosme did. But Estrada just had, this past season, the power broke out in a way that I did not think was there. And he had, 9 home runs, some opposite field home runs as well. He reached high A at 19 years old. It was only 98 high A plate appearances, but he dropped his strikeout rate and increased his walk rate. The strikeout rate was like 13% in high A. The walk rate went up from 7 to 11%. Pretty good start. I imagine he's back in Aberdeen to start the year because he's only going to be 20 years old. But I think he could end the year in Double A at 20 years old. He also stole 39 bases. Good hit tool, growing power, plus speed. I think Estrada's poised for a pretty solid year this year. When he gets to Bowie and starts mashing home runs in Bowie and Chesapeake, that's going to take all season. We're going to call it Bowie all year. Just heads up. But if he starts mashing home runs down there in Chesapeake, I know it's hitter friendly, but still, I think that Estrada becomes a major player in the system.
Yeah, Estrada's my guy. I don't mean to be down on him in any way when I don't put him number one on my list. I just think he kind of already broke out. I think he's like borderline top 15 prospect already in the system. So
nationally will break out.
Go to this question now from Ozzy. The Orioles are picking 19th in the 2025 draft. Do you have any players that we should be keeping our eye on as an early possibility for that pick? And I'm going to start with Nick, because Nick actually has already given us a draft preview over at Substack.
Yeah, this one was fun. It's already started. I started early, way early this year. I head over to Substack, oriolesontheverge.substack.com, as Zach says every week. The traction that we've been getting on Substack has been phenomenal over the last couple of weeks. The number of people signing up. You don't even have to pay for it, but a couple people have even like making donations through Substack. You guys are the real MVPs, listeners there. It's awesome to see. So check out the Substack. We're keeping it active this year, but I wrote down 4 names and highlighted some guys. Nick Dumanil. I butcher that last name every time, but he's a California Baptist kid. He's going to be a first round pick, potential 5-tool player, huge power. Like, he's already making adjustments at the plate. This fall, he's hitting 450-foot bombs in fall scrimmages. I really like this kid a lot. It could be, I think he plays his way kind of ahead of where the Orioles are going to pick, and the Orioles aren't able to go after him. But some other guys, Ethan Conrad at Wake Forest. I know Joe Doyle put out his first mock draft, and he mocked Ethan Conrad to the Orioles. He's a lefty. He's this year's Seaver King. Seaver King, D2 product, went to Wake Forest, was a first-round pick of the Nationals this year. Conrad was at Marist. He's moving up to Wake Forest this year, but went to the Cape Cod League and showed out. Both Conrad and Dumanil had huge Cape Cod seasons, put themselves on the map, proved they could hit with the big boys. But Conrad's a power-hitting lefty. If he has a big year at Wake Forest, he's going to break out. And then because we drafted 2 UVA guys last year, why not add 2 to this year? And the Orioles have, 3, 4, 5 picks we're going to have in the top. Maybe 1 or 2 maybe 1 gets traded. Who knows? But either way, the Orioles are loaded with early draft picks. Maybe they draft 2 more UVA guys. But Henry Ford and Henry Godbout. Godbout's great last name. I feel like we could do a lot with that one. But Henry Ford was a catcher. Then he was a first baseman. Played a little bit of third base. He's a sophomore this year, draft eligible sophomore. He's going to play outfield this year at UVA. And if he can hold his own out there in right field, his draft stock's going to go through the roof. As a freshman, he hit 17 home runs with an 18% strikeout rate. This guy's a massive human being with huge exit velos. I love the bat. And Godbout is one of the best hitters in the entire country, probably a second baseman. But according to Peter Flaherty over at Baseball America, he hit 556 against fastballs, 93 plus miles per hour last year, 86% contact rate, one of the best pure premier hitters in the country with power exploding. There's even a video of him last year against Wake Forest. He went up against Chase Burns, the Wake Forest phenom pitcher, first-round pick of the Reds last year. Chase Burns threw a 99 mile per hour fastball way up in the zone to Godbout, and Godbout drilled it out of the park. That was a fun video to watch. But those are my first 4 way early looks at tonight. It's also December, and we have an entire college baseball season to go. So everything will change, but some early names.
I'd love to see God mode all season long. No, this is my blind spot when it comes to the valuation in baseball. This is Nick's domain, and unless Ethan Holiday's fallen down to 19, I don't know. So I'm going to pass.
So I would definitely keep an eye on all the names that Nick mentioned in his article. One more I'll throw out there. MLB Pipeline, their first mock draft has Georgia's Trey Phillips going to the Orioles at 19. And I do feel like this would be an Orioles pick in a lot of ways, because here's a good college bat with good power, good contact in the zone, and Team USA baseball success. Now, that's one thing we've seen a trend of with the Orioles over the years, dating back to when Brad Selick was in charge of the draft, and I suspect it's going to continue or prove to continue under Matt Blood. They really do value what players do while they're with Team USA, and Phelps stood out there, so I could really see him being a target for the Orioles. So, again, that's a really early look, but checks off a lot of boxes. Major Division I program, good power, some versatility, albeit looks like he's going to be limited to the corners defensively. But if he could stick in the outfield and bounce between those 2 positions and give the Orioles power from the right side, I think he could be a good match for them.
I'm up. Bird fan 123, a great member on the Verge Discord channel. So if you're not signed into our Discord, get in there. Some great talks, some great conversations going on, not just for patrons. He would like to know, who is the under the radar pitching prospect that sets himself up significantly better for 2026? I'll go back to Zach.
So if you want to look at who could really boost their value the most going into 2026, I would argue Edgar Portes. He was just Rule 5 eligible this past offseason during this offseason, and was not protected by the Orioles, the 40-man roster spot, and was not taken by another team. And the fact that Portes was not taken was really not that surprising, even when you consider the Padres rolling the dice on Juan Nunez, because Portes doesn't have the same electric stuff that Nunez has. And like Nunez, he's a younger arm that has yet to pitch above A ball. Couple of differences, though, which is that one, Portes was healthy last year. And the other is that over the course of the season, he generally sustained the command improvements that he had shown towards the end of the 2023 season with Delmarva. So going into 2025, in a best case scenario, here's how I could see the year unfolding for Portes. He goes up to Bowie, more than holds his own in that hitter-friendly environment, continues to cut back on the walks, continues to refine his pitch mix beyond his fastball. His fastball velocity might not be eye-popping, but it has phenomenal movement. And you look at the data, some of those secondaries really work for him. And I feel like that if he can go to Bowie and have the kind of season that Cameron Weston just had there, which was a phenomenal year, he's a lock to get protected next year. And I know that's a really, really early preview at the Rule 5 draft, but he's either a lock to get protected or the Orioles aren't going to have room for him, so he's a lock to get flipped to the deadline for someone else, and he'll go on that organization's 40-man roster in 2025, 2026, and be one of their breakout arms at the higher levels of the minor leagues. So Portes, I feel like, is already on the radar in some respects, but if you want to look at who could really do the most this year to set themselves up for a shot at the big leagues, not necessarily right away in 2026, but sometime later into the year and set themselves up for a 40-man roster spot, I think it's Portes.
I like Portes. My guy, I don't think we can call like Michael Ferret, Nestor Herman, Trey Gibson, Keeler Morphe under the radar anymore. But hopefully more like national respect for those guys moving forward. But I'm going to go ahead and, speaking of Substack, I want to spoil Monday's piece. Every Monday, the articles have been going out there every Monday, plus more that we've got up. Bob's off-season plans going up as news breaks, more pieces coming up. So again, check out Substack. My Monday piece, even though it's going to be Christmas week, I've already got it scheduled up. I'm going to spoil it though and use one of the. I'm looking at pitching in Monday's article because why not? And my guy that I'm going to choose for this question is going to be Yeber Cartaya. He looked really good when he was in Delmarva. The numbers, not to spoil the entire article, but like the numbers were dreadful. His first 2 years in the organization, walked everybody, improved the walk rate to 19% when he got to the FCL. So that tells you just how bad it was when he first started. I think I described him when we watched his first start with Delmarva as like a baby giraffe learning how to walk. And that's kind of what it looked like. He's 6'5", and he's just kind of all over the place. He did struggle to find the strike zone a little bit in that first start, but he settled in Delmarva. It was 20-something innings, a 1.11 ERA, strikeouts way up, walks way down. I don't know. He's a young guy. He's only 21 or 22. I think he turns 22 in a couple weeks. I think this is a sleeper in the system, and he's going to be part of this next tier that at the end of 2025, we're like, man, we're on Cartaya. We've been telling you about him for a year. John Mioli's got him in the top 20. Everyone else will be catching up to Cartaya come 2026 if he continues to take the step forwards that he did last year.
Yeah, so many options here. I mean, we are so deep when it comes to this part of the system. There's Preston Johnson, who I think could bounce back in a big way. I think Chase Alsop is a under the radar name still, even though he was our top pitcher drafted, and I think his stuff's going to be huge, but we haven't seen him yet, so I don't know if people know what to expect. But my answer is going to be, speaking of under the radar, how about under the water? Teddy Sharkey, out for 2024 with injury. He's going to come back and fly through the system, I think, in 2025 and be potential bullpen piece in 2026 early on. So Teddy Sharkey's my bet. I think as long as he's healthy and his stuff is the way it was he's intense, and his stuff out of a bullpen should move quickly, especially with a year missed. I think they're going to want to get him up to speed and up to AAA by the end of the year.
I like it. There's a website out, another Orioles website out there that said he had Tommy John surgery last year. He did not have Tommy John surgery. It was a back injury. So we'll leave that website alone. But we got one more question here from Brady Jones. And this was I was trying to think of, I've got a name that we could talk about trading for a pitcher. And I realized it's because of this question. Brady wants to know any interest in trading for Brandon Woodruff. He makes $5 million in 2025, plus a $20 million mutual option in 2026. He did not pitch last year. I think that was Tommy John, maybe correct. But he did not pitch last year. So he will be back. I know the Brewers have already said he is probably not going to be in the rotation come opening day, but he's slated to come back in 2025. Are we trading for him, Bob?
I'm interested in at least investigating what it would take to get him. I'm trying to look up the old baseball trade values to see what they have him at, to see if it's even worth really considering. Almost there. Woodruff is at the end. 7.6 surplus value. Would I trade Dylan Beavers for him? Who wouldn't I trade Dylan Beavers for, to be honest? No. Vivek comes in clutch. Shoulder surgery, which is definitely tougher to come back from. I would not trade Dylan Beavers for Brandon Woodruff, especially with that news. And I mean, $5 million is cheap. So even if he's a reliever at that point, I mean, it's not terrible, but I would inquire, but I doubt that I would pay what it would take to get him.
Yeah, I'm of the same mindset because without knowing more about how that shoulder recovery is going, I, it would take a lot to sway me on a deal because really what it boils down to is he going to come back in the first half of 2025 and how confident are you in that? Because otherwise, to my way of thinking, you're just putting one more pitcher in the Tyler Wells, Kyle Braddis category. Now, the mutual option also kind of complicates this because a lot of times mutual options don't ever go through because either the player underperforms or is hurt and the club declines, or the player comes back and bounces back strong and he opts out. So it might only be for 1 year. The happy medium in there is that Woodruff comes back sometime late in 2025 and pitches well enough that the Orioles are interested, but not necessarily well enough that he's going to do better than 20 million on the open market. That's possible, but it's a weird gray area that I don't know that anyone actually will live in. Again, for the right price, I will say this, for the right price, absolutely investigate it and I would consider it, but it wouldn't be a top priority for me.
Also, if he's healthy, why would the Brewers consider it when they'd have him for $5 million and they're contenders in the NL Central? I mean, I like thinking outside the box. It's definitely not something I had on my mind until I saw this question. So appreciate the question. I just don't know if, and yeah, like you said, the mutual option, if he does well, he's opting out. If he doesn't, the Orioles would. I don't see the fit. I don't know, but it is interesting.
I mean, they got Nestor Cortez. They can move on from Brandon Woodruff. I like Woodruff a lot. It doesn't sound like I've done a deep dive here. This just kind of listen to some fantasy content, early fantasy content stuff. Like people are drafting Woodruff for fantasy at least. So it doesn't sound like he's going to be out too long. I think it's just kind of ease him back into rotation role this year with the Brewers. He's one of the more consistent pitchers in all of baseball when he's healthy. Like his worst year in the last 5 years, his worst year was since he became a full-time pitcher, actually. His worst year was 2019, his first full-time season in the big leagues, and he was a 3.3 F4 pitcher. It's like 30% strikeout rate, 6% walk rate every single year since then. But yeah, I think I'm out on Woodruff. I think you can get higher upside guys who aren't coming off injuries. Everyone's going to get hurt eventually, but there are higher upside moves that I think you could probably get at a much lower cost. That hopefully the Orioles are having those conversations right now as we're talking. Hopefully Michael Elias is on the phone having some conversations of his own. But
Yeah, shoulder surgeries are very scary. I don't trust them. If it was Tommy John, you kind of know what you have at that point. 95% of the time they come back at least close to what they were before. Shoulders could go any sort of way. So I think they're more career ending often than not than Tommy John. So that's another reason I would be wary.
yeah. He's getting to turn 32 years old too. So
That does it for this mailbag episode. Thank you to our listeners for submitting questions. Most of our questions do come in through our Discord channel. And as Bob mentioned, you don't have to be a member of our Patreon community to access the mailbag part of this. Actually, let's throw in one more question here from AJ before I wrap up. So, are we sad about not getting Kyle Tucker or Cody Bellinger with so much trade capital?
I mean, Kyle Tucker would have been fun, but I mean, for 1 year of a guy who's definitely going to hit the market, looking for $400+ million for 1 year, I don't know if I'm not selling the farm for 1 year of Kyle Tucker when we're set up for a long time here. I think the Orioles, and I agree with them, they want to be a contender, not just in a 3 to 5 year window like the last time the Orioles were contenders. They want to be contenders continuously moving forward, and hopefully never is a long time, but hopefully not for a very long time have to rebuild again. And I agree with that take. So not sad. I mean, I'm sad that we didn't get Tucker, but I'm happy that he didn't go to the Yankees and that he went to the National League. He's with the Cubs. Bellinger, I could care less. I think that's just a mediocre hitter who's going to clog the Yankees lineup even more. So no, not too sad, honestly.
yeah,
I don't, and he's hyping up the Yankees offseason, which we talked about in our first episode. I mean, Max Fried's great. Devin Williams is really good if he's healthy. Bellinger's okay. He's like league average hitter. What an offseason. I don't know. I still think we're the favorite. I'm not scared of the Yankees at all.
no. I wonder if you took the name Bellinger off his numbers and you just had people look at the numbers, look at the data, what would the conversation around Bellinger be? Like, I don't see it. I honestly, I enjoy the story. The whole, what is Bellinger's wife is Giancarlo Stanton's ex. Like, somebody did not do their homework as the Orioles would have. Sure there, but yeah, I'm not scared of the Yankees at all. I have no issues with Bellinger. The Orioles were reportedly in on Bellinger. I'm sure there were probably conversations. I'm sure every team had the conversation. I'm perfectly fine with not trading for him. Tucker, it's kind of the same thing. Like, the Orioles still project. I don't want to. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, Kyle Tucker doesn't care. We don't need him. Every team would love Kyle Tucker. Every team needs a Kyle Tucker. Kyle Tucker makes your baseball team better because he is one of the best hitters in baseball. But as it stands right now, the Orioles still project to be one of the best offenses in all of Major League Baseball next year. I'm fine with it. We can make upgrades in other areas and be a better team next year.
We need an ace. There's 2 months to get one, and we're confident that we will get one. So that's where I think it ultimately is going to end up.
Yeah, I'm not sad about missing out on Bellinger. I think that it was a nice bounce back for him in 2023. I think if you look at the underlying data in 2024, it points to some regression. Tucker, I would have loved to have had Kyle Tucker. I won't pretend that I didn't want Kyle Tucker or that I don't think Kyle Tucker wouldn't have made the Orioles better. I would have loved to have had Kyle Tucker, but the bottom line is a corner outfield bat is not the top thing that the Orioles need this offseason. They do need an ace, and let's see if they can go out and get that.
I mean, I will say if the Yankees would have got Kyle Tucker on top of Max Fried and Devin Williams, then I'd say, yeah, damn it, Yankees are doing it again. But they got Cody Bellinger instead, and that is a nice relief.
I'm looking real quick. Just continue this. Yeah, like Steamer projections. Gunnar Henderson, number 1 in baseball. Adley Rutschman, nice bounce back candidate, number 22 in all of baseball. Aaron Judge is up there with Gunnar, but like it's the Orioles over the Yankees here. Anthony Volpe, you buying Anthony Volpe? Having a huge year offensively? No. Jazz Chisholm? Nah. Like this team just doesn't scare me. And we don't need to keep talking about the Yankees. We were so convinced though last year that, oh, you got Cortez, you've got Garrett Cole, you got this rotation that's not going to hold up. You're putting
Marcus
Stroman, yeah. You're putting Aaron Judge in center field every single day. Like Stanton it's not if, it's when he's going to go in the IL. The injury variance was super in the Yankees' favor last year. So you can't plan for that, but I don't think they're setting themselves up well. And of course, it's another offseason of Jason Dominguez is going to be a Hall of Fame player. I'll pass. And Spencer Jones coming up to strike out 55% of the time. I'll pass.
Yeah, the Yankees didn't get Kyle Tucker because they refused to trade Luis Gil, who is like a 26-year-old rookie who had a 5 ERA in the second half last year. Darn, I'm really, and oh my God, I could keep going on about the Yankees. Brian Cashman pissed off because they thought they had a better offer, and God, I love when the Yankees are suffering.
And that does it for this episode. If this is our last episode of 2024, which it might not be, we might be able to jump back in before 2024 wraps up. But if it is our last episode of 2024, thank you to you, the listeners, for helping us week in and week out make this show better and for continuing to support us. Also want to shout out Believe for a great first year with the network. We've certainly enjoyed that, and we look forward to continuing this partnership in 2025. In the meantime, between now and our next show, you can check out our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. As Nick mentioned earlier, he will have a new piece up on Monday, and we will have more content coming out for you. And as a reminder, our top 50 prospects countdown is coming up soon on our Patreon community. If you're not a member of our Patreon community, sign up today. You can join for as little as $3 a month. If you are a member of our Patreon community, consider gifting a membership to the Orioles fan in your life. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.